Have you ever wondered what element is the best to use for a certain dungeon? I certainly did. In this video, I'm going to try to figure out if there is a best element for a dungeon or a group of dungeons. So let's see how I did that. In this sheet, I will list every monster you can find in a certain dungeon. Together with that, I list their HP and their resistances. What follows is a calculation which tells me how much damage you have to do before resistances is applied. So if a monster has 100 HP and 50% resistance, then you'll see that it says 200. So you have to do 200 damage before resistance to kill it, because it will take away 50% of your damage, which leaves 100, and that's equal to his HP. In the last column, you'll see earth percent or average of neutral percent and earth percent. It means as an earth character, you can equip a weapon that deals neutral damage. In some situations, that might be beneficial. What this column represents is the average of 2 times the neutral resistance and 1 time the earth resistance. Basically, that means if you have 6 AP, I assume you can use 4 AP to deal damage with your neutral damage type weapon and 2 with an earth spell. Obviously, it's not perfect, but it feels like a fair calculation. First up, there's Kardorim's Crypt. We see here all the monsters you find in a dungeon with their levels and the quantities, their HP and their resistances. At the bottom we see the results, and the fire element would have to do the most damage to kill all the monsters. 1020 in total, where if you have a neutral weapon and are strength based, you only have to do 954 damage. It's a little difference. The other elements are quite close to 1000, so there's not much difference here. And in fact, this dungeon is so easy, every character can solo it with a PB set. So there's no benefit to pick one certain element in this dungeon. Next, Famished Sunflower. Same as the previous dungeon, the monsters are listed here and their HP, resistances. There's a greater gap between the lowest and highest. The best elements to choose are chance and agility, or the water or the air element. The worst is fire again. A difference of 140 damage that you have to do. It's not really much because it's over the whole dungeon, so over 20 mobs. But still the first gap is showing, so it might be worth taking a look into all the other dungeons. If we look at the Sandy Castle, we'll see a big difference between the best and the worst element to choose. Funny enough, the best element is also the worst element, because the best element is being strength, so the earth element, but with a neutral damage weapon that you'll use mainly. The worst element is full earth, so not doing damage in a neutral element, but only in the earth element. It's a difference of 500 damage that you have to do, mainly because in the neutral element there's no specific snapper that's highly resistant to neutral damage. The other elements are a bit in between. The fire element is more towards the earth neutral. The water and air element are more towards the earth element. So between fire and the other three, there's also quite a big gap. Next dungeon, Royal Gobball. The outcome of this dungeon surprised me a bit. Mainly because I think this dungeon is a little bit difficult to solo if you're not a high level. If you run multiple characters, it's not that difficult. And I thought that the agility element, the air element, would benefit a lot because the dungeon keeper is almost not resistant to the air element and is resistant to the other elements. But all other monsters in the dungeon are, most of the other monsters in the dungeon are resistant to air. We see the Gobball, the Gobball War Chief, and the White Gobbly. So in total, that makes it the air element the weakest, the worst to choose. I still think that the air element is the best choice here because the dungeon keeper, the Royal Gobball, is the most difficult to deal with. You want to kill it first and you want to kill it fast, and you can do it the quickest by being an air elemental class. Last dungeon for this video is Kickroach Lair. The hardest dungeon in the F2P area, and there's really only one element that shines in this dungeon, and that's the water element. We can see here the difference between the water element and the second best, either the neutral earth combination or the agility, the air elemental. The gap is really big. It's about 10% difference. When we look to the other two elements, earth and fire, the gap is even bigger. So it's definitely a good choice to run the water element for this dungeon. When we look at the resistances per mob, we see that this one has a negative resistance to chance. This one as well, as is does this one, and the other monsters do not have a resistance to water element. Only the dungeon keeper is somewhat resistant to water. In total, it gives you a really big advantage. You can clear the other monsters very quickly and just deal with the Kickroach, the dungeon keeper, the latest. So if you struggle with this dungeon, it's really worth it to choose the water element if you have that option. So let's take a look at the final results. If we add up all the damages you have to do in each dungeon per element, we'll see that the water element is the winner, followed by earth combined with neutral. They are really close together. All other three elements are a less optimal choice. In third place is the air element, in fourth place the fire element, and in last place it's the earth element. However, if you can equip a neutral damage type weapon, you can compensate for that. So to make a long story short, if you're looking for the best element for the dungeons in the F2P area, you either have to pick the water element or the earth element with a neutral damage weapon. That concludes this video. Next video will be the remaining dungeons for the levels 1 to 50. If you don't want to miss that, make sure to subscribe to my channel, and please let me know what you think of this video.